Thriving companies, teams, and individuals seem to share a common theme of trust. Trustworthiness is similar to oxygen. It's often not thought about until it's absent. Then it's all we can think about. There's no worse gut punch than hearing, "I don't trust you," from a member of your personal or professional circles. And so we learn from an early age the black and white of what we're told being trustworthy is. Don't lie, keep your promises, engage in fair practices, and so on. Yet so much of work is in the gray. A series of small choices, decisions based upon probabilities, best intentions with uncertain outcomes. Relationships characterized as trustworthy are not passive. They are purposeful and often built upon scar tissue of lessons learned. And those scars have stories. Join us as we get into the messy and complex pieces of relationships where trust is either strengthened or weathered away. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Ryan Berardi. Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're returning our focus to trust and digging deeper into the gray areas where maintaining trustworthiness or trust hygiene may be difficult for professionals. We are so grateful to have Dr. Taylor Alouisa and Dr. Alex Rohrer joining me. Welcome, folks. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So let me just go give a brief introduction to both of you. Dr. Taylor Alouisa is the principal of Leola Elementary School within Conestoga Valley School District. She also has her doctorate in educational leadership and educational technology. And Dr. Alex Rohrer currently works as a community school director at Burroughs Elementary School within the School District of Lancaster and is an adjunct instructor of behavioral sciences at Wilmington University. Alex has his doctorate in prevention science, researching mental health promotion, violence prevention, and criminal justice system challenges. How are both of you doing today?
Great.
Pretty well. How are
Good.
you?
Are you excited to have this conversation?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It's an important one.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much that we can talk about. We're going to have to keep it to an hour, but I feel like we could probably talk for hours about this, right?
Yeah.
I am just very excited to have both of you here with me. So prior to working in private industry, I spent 17 years in public education as a teacher and then principal. Both of you are doing important work in education right now. In addition to the general value your lived experiences have, I have found that education environments include stakeholders with such varied needs, very different lived experiences, different priorities, and definitely varying emotions. To do both of your jobs well, both of you have to build, maintain, and repair trusting relationships with individuals who have varying levels of understanding of the science of your industry, who have their present logic or reasoning impacted by a host of emotions, and who have exposure to you maybe daily or maybe once or twice a year. So really, I can think of no better individuals to talk to about organizational trust than the two of you who've been building trusting relationships with a rotating door of hundreds and hundreds of stakeholders year after year. So no pressure, but I think you're both rock stars.
Thank you.
So allow me to set the stage a bit here. In June of 2023, the Behaviors featured Kedron and Sarah as they discussed trust in depth through understanding frameworks, providing clear expectations, and knowing when to make tough decisions on relationships when building trust has proven to be unlikely. There they share Rachel Botsman's definition of trust, a confident relationship with the unknown. I'm going to offer another definition that I think does an excellent job of defining trust from Brene Brown. Choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. In that same podcast, we learned the drivers of trust are logic. I know you can do it. Your reasoning and judgment are sound. Authenticity. I experienced the real you. And empathy. I believe you care about me and my success. So let me just pause there for a second. This is a little off the cuff, but just you heard two definitions of trust and the drivers. I am curious about your reactions to either of those definitions or the details within, or just about the foundation of trust in general. Taylor, can I start with you? Just reactions to those definitions.
Yeah, I think both of them are really spot on in very different ways. At the core, I think of trust really is that relationship piece. And so when you're thinking about a relationship, it is really dynamic and it's multifaceted. And although the definitions aren't the same, when we're building trust, we're really focusing on that relationship. And so there are lots of components that go along with it.
Yeah, love it. Alex, how about you? What are your thoughts?
So I love both of the definitions as well. I'm a very visual person.
Yeah.
So I like to when I'm thinking of any kind of word or any kind of term, I really like to bring a picture to mind. And for me, trust is like a bridge, because it's literally connecting people. So I know a lot through trust conversations, they talk about it being broke or not broke. But using that bridge analogy, that bridge imagery, I like to think of it as more not being broken, but more weathered or eroded. Because I think it takes, and I know Brene Brown talked about this in her podcast, but it takes some time. Even those small moments are kind of weathering away at that.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that bridge analogy, it kind of captures that it's not just between the two people either.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also the surroundings, because if you think of a bridge, like it can be weathered away and eroded by just the weather, like the things that are happening around it in that environment, what's supporting the bridge, what's not supporting the bridge. And so then I think of, that would be an analogy to maybe like institutional racism or a history of trauma. Those are things that erode trust that necessarily doesn't have to deal with the two people in the room.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that bridge analogy really helps me conceptualize what trust is broader than
That's
just
awesome.
the people.
Love that. So what I promised our listeners we're going to do in this podcast is get into the real messy and complex moments of trust. And this is, I hope, not only going to be valuable for the listener who's passively, taking care of catching up on the behaviorists, but also for future clients of Work Wisdom when maybe they're having some tricky situations with trust. And so let's talk about some pivotal, complex moments where it's challenging to leverage trust. I want you to start by thinking selflessly about trust and talk about our role in helping our reports or our employees that we serve in developing their own self-trust. It's no secret that self-trust is vital in order for us to extend trust to others and for others to assess that it's wise to actually trust us. So I'm curious, what role, if any, do managers have in helping their employees develop self-trust? Are there any missteps for managers to avoid? Alex, how about I start with you on this one?
Sure. So I think this makes me think of it was a Harvard Business Review article that you had shared with us, talking about authenticity, logic, and empathy in it. And you mentioned it in the beginning of the podcast as well. And I think the role that we have as a leader in our organization is to be able to identify which one of those is the trust wobble for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because if we can't even do that, how are we going to ask somebody else to do it? So we kind of have to practice that, which kind of gets into that piece of the integrity piece of Brene Brown's talk too. Like, you're not just preaching these kinds of things, but you're actually practicing them.
Yeah.
So I think for me, identifying what my trust wobble is, as they talk about in the article. And for me, this one really, I did reflect on it for a little bit, and authenticity was my struggle point. And I think that came from a colleague saying to me, like, serious is not a good look on you. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? And I reflected on it, and I'm like, it's because I'm not trusting myself to be authentic at work. I'm a very humorous person. I love to do that. And I think it's partly because when you go to a workplace, there's this maybe false assumption that you can't be fully authentic because it's a workplace. You have to be professional, and you can't bring those things to work, when in reality, those things make you stronger usually, if you're being authentic. So I think that one really opened my eyes and kind of changed the way I approach things. And I think we need to do that self-assessment before we're asking others to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Taylor, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love what Alex was saying there, because I can relate so much, and we are totally opposite. So serious doesn't look good on you, and I am much more of a serious, quiet, I think analytical person. And I think as a result of that, and I am a firm believer that a lot of trust is made in our own head based on interactions that are happening, whether that's, behaviors, conversations, communication. And so it's difficult for me sometimes, because although in my head I feel like I'm being friendly or bubbly, that's not always how it comes across to other people. And so I have to work really hard in those moments to build trust and to really be strategic in how I'm behaving and modeling what I'm expecting of my staff. And so that's a difficult component for me to juggle sometimes. But I think too, being authentic is huge, and something that Brene Brown had said in her podcast, and something that I really appreciate, is that if we're being vulnerable, then that is seen and then is also reciprocated. And so a big shift in actually a lot of the work that I did with Kedron is sharing with my staff, what are my areas of growth? What are my goals for this school year? And doing that at a faculty meeting and talking through why I chose them and what my action steps will be and what the staff's part in helping me achieve my goals are. And through that, I had so much feedback like, wow, that was really impactful for us to see that, you're not just holding us accountable, but you're also, being held accountable in your role as well. And it's like he said, those little moments that really make a big difference.
Yeah. I remember as a younger principal, it was really kind of scary for me to be professionally vulnerable. In many ways, even my own internal dialogue was, who the heck do I think I am trying to run this school?
Yes.
And so I hear what you're saying, both of you, and it makes so much sense to find ways to have that metacognitive process of how you develop your own self-trust, doing that out loud, perhaps in group settings where it's the right time to do it, but also individually. Maybe you have a staff member who is having trouble trusting themselves, and maybe just hearing your own story, showing enough vulnerability you feel is appropriate in that moment can help them maybe build their own trust. Love that. Very cool.
Yeah, I love Adam Grant, his podcast too, so Work Life, and he actually it was an episode about building trust with people you don't like necessarily.
Yeah.
And so one of the things he had found in some of the research he looked through was that actually vulnerability is before trust. And a lot of people assume it's the other way around, where you have to have trust to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But he's saying how one of the studies he talked about was with strangers, and they had them ask personal questions of each other. And the people who engaged in those questions actually felt more trust afterwards, even though they were strangers. And actually one of the couples went on to get married. So these people that had no idea of each other, that vulnerability built so much trust that then they could have a relationship after that.
Wow. Cool. All right. So now we're going to move to a really difficult scenario. Situations where perhaps leaders have made a decision that has caused broken trust, even if accidental. And I guess I should pause here for a second, because the reason this question came to mind is because, unfortunately, there have been times throughout my career, certainly accidental, but I can think back to easily a handful of situations where I'm like, man, that choice I made broke some trust. And sometimes I don't know that I repaired it well. Other times maybe I did an okay job in it. But here's the thing with practicing trust, right? It's like we're not purposely trying to get into sticky situations where we can practice it like once a week. Right. So when it happens, it oftentimes catches us off guard.
Yeah.
So in any event, when trust is broken, even if accidental, when a person breaks trust, especially someone in a position of authority, what are the short-term and long-term steps that need to take place to begin the rebuilding process? And how do you know if you're succeeding during this rebuild? I envision somebody years from now listening to this podcast who just had an accidental blunder, and they're like, man, where do I begin? And so cue Taylor and Alex. So Taylor, let's have you kick this one off.
So I think this is another position to be vulnerable. Who is always trustworthy? There is nobody that is always trustworthy. And it could be, even the tiniest little thing, a small interaction where you say something and then you don't follow through on that. Those small interactions ultimately lead to, whether or not I trust this person. And so it is something that as a leader, you have to be very intentional about. If I say something, I need to make sure that I'm ready to follow up on it, whether that's with a parent who's upset about a student situation, a community organization, like, yeah, we'd love to partner with you, or, an interaction with a staff member. And that component, sometimes it's a lot to juggle. So making sure that I'm not ever biting off more than I can chew, that I'm making sure that my commitments are manageable. But again, like you said, we're human. And so I think vulnerability, owning, and that's really hard to do in some instances, but you can't shy away from that. And so I just think part of my leadership culture is I really try hard to create and maintain a culture of authentic communication. And so if I make a mistake, I do feel like I could say to my staff or to a family, look, I was wrong, and here's why I was wrong, and here's where I was thinking that led me to this wrong, or it was an oversight, being very sincere and authentic. And I think most times when you really confront it head on, it really does wonders it opens a lot of, even communication dialogue about, what I could have done better, give me some feedback. I'm not better or worse than anybody else in my building, and really accepting that. But the short-term steps would be, number one, to own it. Really get a finger on your pulse of how did this impact the culture of my building, of my community, or, just even that relationship with that family. And then really sort of creating some action steps to dig yourself out of that. Step one, obviously, being ownership, but then step 2, 3, and 4, how do we repair, whatever that incident was? And really making steps, but being clear with whoever was impacted by that breakdown of trust. And then the long-term piece is there's really potential growth when there's a breakdown of trust and you tackle it the right way. I really believe that if you really focus on, rebuilding, what is that, what is my goal for culture? What does this communication look like? How am I checking back in? Who are people that I really trust to give me honest feedback about, what is the general sense of, digging myself out of that hole? I do think it can be a great opportunity for the staff or that family to see you as human, but also that you prioritize, gaining that trust back or making that situation, right. And all of that is so critical in any organization, not just an educational one, but really any institution.
I want to touch on part of what you discussed about, that plan to kind of right the ship. And I realize I'm putting you on the spot with this, but
okay.
So there's a podcast.
Yeah.
How public does that plan? And I know it can depend, but how public might you make that plan? I mean, do you share? So let's step away from school for a second. Let's just talk about organizations in general.
Yeah.
You're maybe a mid-level manager. Do you share it with your boss? Do you share it with the people on your team? Do you share it with cross departments? Does it matter who it impacted? Like, how public would you make that plan?
So I'm very blessed to have a very good relationship with my boss. And if any mistake I make, I feel like I can go to her. And we do have a culture of communication, forgiveness, and growth. And so I would most certainly talk to her about it. But when there is a breakdown in trust, I think being public in the sense that, like, I don't want to make those action steps myself. I made that mistake. So I do want to get, some feedback from everybody that was impacted in order to develop those steps. And so there is a component of you have to be so vulnerable that you're willing to, really lay it all out for whoever was impacted in that scenario. And sometimes it's your whole staff, your whole building, everybody that works there. And really, gaining that feedback. So I do think the public component of that is owning it so much that people see that you're really making the effort to make it right, no matter how much of a hit it might be to your ego. And there is a big part of ego you got to drop that at the door when there's a breakdown in trust. That is a very big component in my mind.
Well said. Alex, how about you? When trust is broken by somebody in leadership, how do you build that back?
Well, Taylor said it really well. I'm going to just... The only thing I would add to that really is it's the similar things that we're teaching our students too, is that when they make a mistake, you're asking them to own it because they have to take ownership. If they can't even acknowledge that, it really puts a barrier up between, making any future steps. Apologizing for it, and sincerely, authentically apologizing for it. And really making sure that the other person accepts that before you move forward. It's so easy just to say, I'm sorry for breaking your trust. And if the other person's really not comfortable yet and you just move on, it's another weathering of that trust right there because you're not acknowledging the fact that they're not ready yet.
Yeah.
And then making that plan of, as Taylor had said, about what you're going to do in the future, how you're going to make it better in the future is really important for that short term. I think in the long term, as Taylor was saying, asking for that feedback and also asking for help because you may not be the best person to rebuild that trust on your own. You might need, it's kind of a concept in other work with violence prevention, but a credible messenger. Somebody that really has a really good relationship with that person that you broke the trust with. They may be able to help repair that. It's kind of restorative to have that group process. Because that person is, they might have a different lens and a different perspective that they can bring to the table and that relationship too, that they can really help repair that you may not be able to do on your own. So I think that's a valuable component. And then that goes back to that asking for help piece, because that's like the ultimate vulnerability is when you're acknowledging, I can't do this by myself, I need somebody's help. And that's showing that you trust your own abilities as well as the abilities of that person you're asking. So that's huge.
Yeah, excellent. So we must expect that despite how wonderful our supervisors, colleagues, and employees are, humans are not infallible, and will be disappointing at times because of broken trust when maybe we're on the receiving end. And so I want to really dig into what's the role of forgiveness in business? Is there a limit? Are there conditions? And how do we deal with these complex emotions in leadership positions? And I'm looking to see if you can offer our listeners some guidance on when they find themselves faced with this. How does that role of forgiveness play out? Alex, I'd love your insight here.
Sure. So I think it kind of gets into that piece of apology again, where you're checking in for that forgiveness, because again, that's an acknowledgement that they've accepted what's being said, what's being done, and feel like they're trusting you again. It's like that trust may have been eroded or something like that, but this is now you're moving forward. So that forgiveness piece is huge. I think one of the things that maybe moving forward that would maybe help with forgiveness is being able to identify what are some things that may lead to that trust being eroded again. Because as all of us have said here, like in an ideal world, that is going to be a consistent thing, that trust is always there. But we know that we don't live in that reality. So unfortunately, it might happen again, and being prepared will maybe help mitigate it in the future. So building in that sense of, I think Brene Brown had talked about it with the generosity piece, being generous and understanding that it's not always, the person's not coming at you with the worst intentions. They may be, you need to assume that best intention piece, and not just for ourselves, or not just for them, but also for ourselves, to be kind, that self-love, that other love. And the other thing with that is identifying emotional triggers for ourselves, because those are the things that probably make us look the worst with our colleagues or something like that. So if we can identify those and really own them, that may help with those future opportunities where trust might be broken, and be more likely then to be forgiven as well.
Yeah. Taylor, how about you?
I love everything you said. I think the workplace is such a strange, I mean, the interactions and the relationships are so much different than personal. And I think that the focus for forgiveness really needs to acknowledge that it is different than a personal life forgiveness. You do really have to be able to overcome it, and be a part of that team and interact in a way that, is really not just impactful, but, will help that, whatever team reach their goal, whatever that might be. And there is still that human component of it. And so at work, the stakes are high. I mean, if you mess up really, really badly, then that's your job on the line. Also, there is a competitive component of work. And so really recognizing that, and as a leader, making sure that we are creating a culture where it's okay to say, hey, I made a mistake. And forgiveness is a big part of being able to say that, knowing that the leader, whoever you're working under, will say, hey, you took a risk, it didn't go well, or you made a mistake. What are the parameters of that? I mean, we definitely want to talk about, like, was it, unethical? Was it, really, really bad? If it wasn't, let's put some bumpers on. Let's see, what support and coaching I can give you, but really building that culture where it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to be human. We all have been there and done that. You said something else that I think is super important. What was the intention? Really stopping, I said it earlier, so much of trust is in our heads. Where is this person coming from? Trying to frame what their thinking might be, what their lens is for looking at the situation, in order to forgive in a way that you can also support them that it doesn't happen again. That's the ultimate goal. It's not always easy, but I think a lot of communication is necessary too. A lot of interactions, checkpoints, accountability points are also a great way at work to ensure that, we have forward momentum.
Yeah. What both of you were saying just reminded me of a couple things. One is I have found that the managers that I've met, whether they're managers in a school setting or managers in industry, by and large, these are really great people that care deeply about the people that they serve as the leader. And so when one of your employees does mess up, we feel that. Like, it hurts. It hurt. We hurt for them, even when we know that this is something that perhaps they are fully responsible for. As their leader, we can't help but to feel some ownership of that. And so part of what came to my head is that Forgiveness, I think, is also for the leader as well, too, right? It's relieving themselves of having to feel that anger. Well, certainly that person is receiving the forgiveness. Part of it's for us as well, too. Like it's like a piece of toxic element that you hang on to. The longer you hold on to it, the more it burns, right? The second piece is that I was reminded of when both of you were talking was it's not an either or when it comes to forgiveness or consequences. It's forgiveness and natural consequences. There are times, as you mentioned, Taylor, where depending on the severity of what has happened, someone can and perhaps should be forgiven. In addition, it's not but in addition, has this happened multiple times? Because if it's a pattern, that's maybe a different conversation than the first time something happened. We often talk about, in my place of business, there's a difference between failure and sloppy mistakes. Failure is going to happen a lot, and that's how we get better. Failure, I had a previous boss share with me that failure is tuition for future success. But sloppy mistakes, where they could have thought more about something and they just chose to cut corners and then people were hurt because of that, we handle that a little bit differently. But forgiveness can still be present in both of those. I think that's what keeps us human. Keeps us grounded, what makes us people. Last question I have for both of you, and this one might really hit home for both of you because you're in environments where there are multiple groups working together but have sometimes different interests. And this can always be so tricky. There are times when groups have been systemically set up with different interests based on difficult histories, or maybe they even see each other as adversaries in some months and other months as partners. Examples might include environments where you have a union president and then a leadership team, or perhaps you have a board and a leadership team that don't see eye to eye. What I'm not looking for here, and obviously not that either of you would do this, I'm not looking for any type of finger pointing or blame. There's no good or bad guy here. It's just groups with inherently different interests and also some overlapping interests. What are some of the first steps that leaders from groups that maybe are set up systemically to sort of be, I don't want to say at odds, but again, with different interests, what are some steps that can be taken on an ongoing basis so that these groups can synergize together and be better because of their presence together versus working in silos separately? Taylor, any wisdom you can offer on this?
Yeah, I think in education, we have so many different groups that work to support our school. And when we're putting any group of adults together, there is a lot of this that happens. And so one of my favorite, I think, tricks of the trade is let's talk about, our strengths as a group, making sure that we have the right people in the right places. When we're working together, what are our roles within this group? Being really strategic, not just on what our vision is for this team or, maybe our staff, but also what is each individual role so that it's not so competitive that we have overlap and disagreement and situations where we may get it so eroded, which I love that you said that earlier, that it's going to be way more challenging to come back from that. And so being very intentional in, demonstrating or showing or getting it out there that everybody has a seat at the table and here's why. And then also I am a big fan of authentic communication. And so if we disagree, let's come up as a team with ways that we can stay on track and, disagree respectfully. And that might be, making sure that we're listening as much as we're talking, or, when we don't agree, how can we compromise? What does that look like with this team here? And having those discussions and being really raw and authentic and vulnerable in those moments, but also recognizing and building the respect and the relationships of the team to know that we're all here for a reason.
Yeah, love that. Alex, how about your thoughts on this?
I really like what Taylor was saying there. I think it's so true in a school setting. You have so many spinning wheels, so many small groups, so many bigger groups. You have so many stakeholders, as you said earlier, all operating together, but also separately. And I think it is really hard sometimes to keep that all under one roof almost, if you think of it that way. But obviously, everyone there is there for the same reason. All of us have that same vision, that same mission of what's best for the student, what's going to promote their learning going forward. And I think when we're looking at it as little pieces, little teams, it's one thing, but thinking of it as one big team and one big culture, I think a lot of the times we're wondering, do all of these fit in that culture, right? Do all of these team mentalities, do all of these team goals fit into that? And instead looking at it more as, and this was kind of talked about in the podcast I listened to by Adam Grant, he had said, looking for cultural contribution. So what are they each able to contribute to that overall culture versus what is, and what's missing? Because each of them can fill in that kind of gap instead of saying, how do we all fit together and all this, but it's, what are they bringing to the table? And I really like that because it's a strengths-based approach, which is, what you're alluding to, Taylor, and thinking of it that way, and sure, they're each going to have their own individual goals, but kind of looking at that big picture is really helpful too.
Yeah, really, really well said. I would encourage our listeners, if they find themselves in this situation, whether it's with a single individual or maybe two groups coming together, something that has served me really well, and they can Google this. It's called the Can't Lose Matrix. And what it does is it helps both parties expose what their ultimate goal of achievement is, but also the thing they hold most sacred that they really can't afford to lose. And I have found that when using that, it creates more vulnerability, it creates more transparency, and the byproduct of that is a feeling of trust. There's not a card being held, under the table or up your sleeve that you're open about everything. There have been times where I've had conversations, and sometimes 45 minutes down the road, we finally uncover like the real issue as to why we're struggling to move forward. I'm like, oh my goodness, if I had known that early on, we would have maybe had a completely different conversation. But shame on me for not asking that question early on. Well, Alex and Taylor, I can't thank you enough for your time. I'm so grateful to both of you for being part of this movement of helping others in the workplace to enhance their individual and collective team performance. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist, and we hope you'll subscribe. Please contact us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom press and productions and ask questions and suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. As is our custom, we will leave you with a quote from organizational psychologist and Wharton professor Adam Grant and his thoughts on trust. Trust is not something you build. It's something you earn. You can choose to act trustworthy by demonstrating your integrity, benevolence, and reliability. But it's up to others to grant you trust, and it's up to you to keep earning it.